WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Thank you for being with us today. The name of the show is We Should Know. I'm J.W. Simmons, your host. We come to you each and every week on Tuesdays at 2:30. We're simulcast on WCLN Radio. We're coming to you from the Star Communications Studios. We appreciate you being with us. There's also a replay for this show at 7 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday. Today we're talking about Child Protective Services. Two supervisors with Child Protective Services, Rhonda Matthews and Alexis Bumgarner. Both of you guys have extensive experience in the area of protective services and dealing with children in the area. Rhonda, I think I've mentioned this when you were on the show before. I want to thank you for your service when you joined the Air Force. That was 2000. You were stationed in Sembach Air Base in Germany as a meteorologist. So we've run out of something to talk about. We can talk about weather today, but I don't think we will. Of course, you've got a family that live right here in the area. Your husband, Dave, and Alexa, you have got a background with the ESS since 2019. You got a master's in social work. Mm-hmm. And this is something, I guess, your career you've planned for. This is something that obviously, if you put work into a master's degree, you're going to have some kind of thought in the field. You're married, Jeff, and you have a child, and you also have experience in the field and done a number of things, and also work with Guardian Ad Litem program. And that's something maybe we could touch on and the importance of that program for us here in the area. So I want to kind of open today with an observation with child prevention for this month. The slogan for child prevention, or the theme for this month for 2022, is Growing Better Together, We Can Prevent Child Abuse in North Carolina. I'll start with you, Rhonda.
Okay.
What are we talking about when we say growing better together? Is that something superficial, or is there a deep meaning in that growing better together?
No, I think there is a deep meaning to that. When it comes to child abuse and specifically prevention, it is a community involvement. It's a community partnership, and it takes all these different community agencies to come together to raise your child. That there is truth to that saying, it takes a village.
And I think, Alexa, when I hear the growing better together, my brain, I see playgrounds, I see, people working together and coming together for events and that kind of thing. But yet at the same time, I see us in what some folks would say is a greatly divided society. So how does that fit? And how does that fit your challenge in your role?
So basically, it's trying to describe that the community, we all have a responsibility to the children. It's always been a cliche, but when you think about the future, the kids are going to be the one that are our doctors, our judges. So it's important for them to be able to grow up in a safe and loving environment. That way, when we look towards the future, we know that it's in good hands. These kids are mentally and physically healthy. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the parents or the aunts and uncles. It's everyone in the community that has a responsibility to make sure that happens.
I noticed an article in the local newspaper that you authored as a guest columnist, and you talked about this idea of seeing something and saying something. Mm-hmm. Kind of give us a little deeper rendition of the importance of that in your job.
So see something, say something is basically just saying anyone. It doesn't matter if you know the family, don't know the family. If you see something that is concerning, call and report it. Every single person is a mandated reporter, which means that they are obligated to call and make a Child Protective Services report on good faith if they have concerns about a child's safety. So you don't always have to have a whole file of evidence saying, okay, this is the evidence I have against the family. If you see something concerning, call and make a report, and then it's our job from there as social workers to look into that and investigate to see what is going on. Are there any services that we can help the family with? So I think it's just important for people to know that everyone is a mandated reporter. So it's our responsibility to pay close attention. If we have a concern about something, I need to go ahead and report that to DSS, and then they will take it from there to see if this is actually a concern or not.
Rhonda, with mandated reporting, somebody may have the question, well, what if I get it wrong? What if I thought something was going on and I call you guys and say, I saw so-and-so and so, and it just didn't look right, and then all of a sudden this particular neighbor or somebody that, that obviously this person knows, they come back to them and, what do you mean calling DSS? And I mean, you could see where this thing could escalate. Speak to that side of it.
Absolutely. So, first thing I would like to point out in that statement is that we are not allowed to tell anybody who a reporter is. So, sometimes clients will guess and make accusations, but DSS is bound by law not to ever report to the family who made the report against them. And it's okay if someone gets it wrong, but our job is not to go in and automatically remove children. Our goal is to make sure the children are safe, provide services to the family if they need them, and to keep the family together. That's our ultimate goal. There are many times we get out to a home with allegations and we find that there's no evidence of that, and that's okay. The worst thing that's going to happen in that situation is that we provide additional community resources that the family may not have known about or have had access to.
Well, we talked quite a bit before we came on air off camera, and one of the things that struck me in the conversation is it appears you guys are never really off duty. You're constantly working. I mean, if you're in the public's eye, you're scanning. Yes. Is that a fair assessment of the job demands and what you do?
Absolutely. Child Protective Services is on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And even when we are out with our families and the public, if we see something that, we have to speak up because we also are mandated reporters. We all do on call different weeks out of the year. So yes, it's a full-time 24/7
So
job.
even if you're shopping or going to the grocery store and that kind of thing, you're still in this role. You're still carrying this badge of child protection.
Yeah, I think everyone should to a certain degree. We may pay a little bit closer attention just because this is what we do on a day-to-day basis. But for instance, Rhonda used an example earlier of, you see a child running around. Okay, well, I'm going to be looking to make sure, is there a parent close by? Are they running in a dangerous road to where, okay, we need to stop and make sure that child is safe, or we need to go ahead and make a report about it. So there's always kind of that thought in the back of your head of, okay, I just need to stop for a second and look to see what the interactions are between the parents or caretakers and the children to make sure that there's not any kind of safety concerns that we need to report.
An example that comes to mind for me is 95 degrees outside, and you walk out of the grocery store and you see a toddler strapped in the back seat of a car. The windows are up and the car's not running. For the average person, they go, there's something wrong here. For you, that's major alert. You guys are probably looking at a brick or something, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, talk about that for a minute, because it's always kind of fascinating to me is that now there's some company that's looking at putting things on cars so it'll make a noise when you leave your car if your child's in the back seat. Have we really reached the saturation point mentally that we forget our children in the back of the car? Apparently that's what's going on.
Well, it's really not for us to judge. We don't ever know, what that parent is going through to where if they forget their child in the back seat. But I know just for my vehicle, when I turn it off, it says reminder to look in the back seat, whether my child's in the car or not. So yes, there's been instances in the news or the media where it talks about, children being left in the vehicle, but it doesn't provide any sort of a backstory on is there concerns with substance use? Is the parent just so physically and mentally exhausted from their responsibilities as a parent that they just honestly forget that their child is in the car? So I think it just really depends on the situation.
I think Alexa nailed it when she said not being judgmental, because we're easy to judge in situations without looking the depth of the background.
Absolutely. And when we first become social workers, we have to go to pre-service training. And one of the core principles that we're taught is that judgments can wait. I think sometimes society has a defined opinion of what CPS does. But one of the things that we are taught is that judgments can wait. Every family has strengths. And so we focus on those things when we're working with a family before we make a decision about what's happened. And we try to get to the core of the problem, not just look at, was this child left alone in the car, but why is that? And what can we do to provide some relief to the family?
And I think this is part of this conversation we're having. It's critically important for understand, particularly as we've mentioned mandated, we've mentioned the judgmental issue, which is easily tips a person into saying, well, it's not up for me to judge whether that child is having an issue or not. Let's kind of revisit that mandated requirement. That is a statutory requirement, correct, Rhonda?
Yes, it is a statutory requirement. And there is no harm in knowing whether or not this has or hasn't happened. You can make the report and leave it to DSS to decide, or, if it's bad enough, law enforcement will be involved as well. But just having that information and having that concern, it is a statutory requirement that it be reported.
And making a report doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is trying to judge the family. They could be doing it just out of good faith or concern for that child. Or I know people don't always have this thought process of Child Protective Services, but they may actually be making a report to try to help the family, because we have a whole avenue of different resources that we try to help to provide to the family, to try to make their lives a little bit easier and to decrease the risk of any kind of safety concerns moving forward for the kids.
Let's touch on for a minute. We're supposedly, I'm not sure we are, but we're coming out of a 2-year pandemic. I'm hoping we are, but if we are coming out of that 2-year pandemic, how has that changed what you have been doing for the past year or two with everything going on with the pandemic? And of course, we've had substance abuse issues. It's been national pandemics as well. But this particular pandemic has been global, and it's caused a lot of attention to that. I want to kind of open that discussion. We may have to go to the next segment with it, but I think it's something we need to talk about.
We have seen an increase in a couple of different types of reports as a result of the pandemic, truancy being one of them. Children either not showing up for their virtual classes during the time when children were remote, or now that they've returned, not attending. So that has been one issue. We've also seen an increase in behavior problems because everybody was stuck in the house together for 2 years remotely. Parents, children, and children with behavior problems. That started to become an issue for parents. Parents are getting frustrated, throwing their hands up in the air. So that can result in improper discipline. And frustrations with parents can then trigger their substance use issues. So we've seen a whole increase in reports over the last 2 years, which is interesting because the first couple of months there was silence. There was almost no reports the first 2 months of the pandemic, but then everything just started increasing after that point. And it's created an entire different way of doing things for us now with the amount of reports that we see.
Alexa, do you guys work closely with behavioral health people, mental health and that kind of thing?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the top resource that we provide to families is mental health. It's always good to have kind of that third party person to talk about. There could be some prior trauma that the parents face, or how to handle negative behaviors that the children have. So we really work closely with therapists or medication management providers to kind of provide a lens on the family to say, this is what we've seen. This is the different concerns that we have. That way we can make sure that the therapist has all the information and provides the correct service.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back, and I'd like to talk a bit about some of those things that we should be seeing that maybe we're not seeing, that may be signals of a child abuse or prevention need there. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned. We're talking about Child Protective Services and Child Prevention Abuse Month right now. We'll be back in a moment.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We're talking about a subject that's really important for this month. April is Child Abuse Prevention Awareness Month right here in North Carolina. And we're talking with two folks that do this on a regular basis. Rhonda Matthews with the Department of Social Services right here in Sampson County, a supervisor in that position. And also Alexis Bumgarner does that job as well. And as a supervisor there. Also, we went off air talking about a number of issues. One of the things that struck me in the conversation is that the subject of child abuse prevention and mandated reporting, that is, you're required by law to report something that is abuse, which brings us to that question of what are some of the things that we might see that are signs that there is abuse going on. And Alexa, back to you, is to not be judgmental in that. And I'll start with you on this.
I think one of the things that people automatically jump to when it comes to looking for different signs is, do they have like any marks and bruises? And that is one thing that we do need to be mindful of, but there's several different areas that we need to kind of pay closer attention to, such as if a child is not attending school or is scared of their parent or caretaker, kind of just paying a little bit closer attention and having those conversations. And there could be times when children come up to you, especially if you're a trusted friend or a relative, they could make a disclosure to you about what's going on in their home. So it's really important at that time, if a child does, to really just listen, because they're obviously trusting you with that information to be able to take action on.
Rhonda, the thing that strikes me is the different stages. When we say child, we're looking at young children that, obviously any age, I mean, even infants, but we're looking at our ability to observe something. In the communication piece, do you have children just step up and say, I'm tired of getting slapped around? I mean, how do they communicate that, and how do you recognize that? I mean, is there, beyond just having a scar or something somewhere, is there a troubled look sign? Is there a disarrayed clothing? Is it malnutrition, or is there something that we can look at and say, yeah, that's something I need to think about?
Yes, it's a combination of all of those things you just mentioned. There have been times that a child will step up and say, this is happening to me. Typically, the child will disclose to a person that they trust. And sometimes I've learned that children will tell you little bits of information to see, are they going to listen to this? And then if you respond well to that child, then they'll disclose a little bit more and a little bit more. So a child's disclosure will depend on how you handle what they're telling you. But also, yes, a child being in disarray all the time, looking malnourished, being fearful and not being able to provide a response to how they got a mark or a bruise, or maybe their stories change. All of those things are signs and things that we look for on a regular basis.
Is this a volatile issue? I mean, when you guys get a report and you either knock on somebody's door or you approach, do you feel a sense of being in peril with your own safety? I mean, have you, I guess if you were my spouse, I would be saying, look, I'm not sure we should go to a house and be knocking on doors. But my question is built around that sense of this is not necessarily one of those things that you can be assured of certain things that may or may not be happening, because it may be a volatile environment.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because there are times, especially depending on when we receive a report, there could be a social worker knocking on your door at 2, 3 a.m. And obviously, probably not going to receive the most welcome greeting at that time. But also there's obviously a stigma with Child Protective Services that we come to the home to remove children, which is so far from the truth. But because there is that stigma, there are some parents or caretakers that could be aggressive or not wanting us to see the children or really engage in the assessment process.
That's a good point. I'm going to follow up on that observation. There is that stigma that exists. People do, I think, and just an observation on my part, is that people do think, well, if the evidence is there enough for you to show up at the door, then you are likely to take some action. Not necessarily so?
That's not necessarily so. When we show up on a door, we have enough evidence that there's an allegation. That's all we're showing up knowing, is that somebody has alleged some type of abuse or neglect. That doesn't mean that it's true. It just means that that's our job, to talk to the family about it, see the children, talk to them. And we can put a safety plan in place if we find that there is a safety concern, and we try to work with that family to eliminate it. But sometimes we get out there and we learn that that's not true. Showing up on your door does not mean we're going to remove children, and it does not mean that we have any evidence at that point. We just have an allegation at that point. And we just need to work with the family to make a safety plan and remove any threat that we do find.
We usually have to look at all possible solutions for the safety risk before removing that child. That is always our very last option. If there's no other ways to ensure that child's safety, then yes, we will assume custody of that child. But we want that child to remain with their parents or their caretakers, because it causes that child trauma if we are having to remove them from the home. So that's when we really have to think about, this is a safety concern. What other way can we address that to ensure that the child is safe while also trying to keep the family together?
You mentioned responding to 2 o'clock in the morning or late hours. If that is the situation, do you go as a team, or do you just look at it and say it's not safe for just one person to be going? Or what is the assessment? What's the result of that assessment?
I think maybe in some bigger counties, their response is a little bit different than ours. Typically, we try to respond ourselves. If it's really late in the night, we might take another social worker, but we don't try to take law enforcement with us. We don't want to escalate a situation. We want to talk with the family calmly, explain the process to them. And I think the response that we get sometimes is in how we present ourselves, when that happens. But we typically do try to go along, because we just want to work with the family, and leave them in a better place. So we don't want to do anything to escalate that by going out with 3 social workers deep, or, law enforcement pulling up behind us. So we try to avoid that.
So explain for us, getting kind of down into details here. When you show up at a location after something being reported, and you walk up to that door, as you're approaching that location, once you knock on the door, start from there, approaching. What are you looking for when you look at the location? What are you looking for when you knock on the door? What are you looking for when you look inside the house? Are there signs that tell you, hey, we got some issues here? I'm talking other than, chains and something in a closet,
Yeah. There's a whole multitude of things that we look for. We're looking at how the parent and child are interacting with each other. How are they communicating with the home? We're honestly just seeing, do they have their basic needs met? Food, water, somewhere to sleep. We're not there to judge if the house is messy or dirty or cluttered, if your dishes are washed. We want to make sure that the basic needs are met. We also have to interview everyone that lives in the house to try to get a better understanding of the family dynamic and who provides care on a day-to-day basis. We ask about discipline, family relationships. So usually when we're first meeting with a family, it could take a couple of hours, just because we need that initial glance of how the family interacts with each other and making sure that we're addressing any kind of safety concerns the child has.
Rhonda, is your visits announced or not announced?
So that depends on the type of report we receive. If it is an investigative assessment, and typically those are the more serious allegations, we do not call ahead. Our policy is that we show up unannounced. The majority of our reports are family assessments, which are things like substance abuse, domestic violence, different types of neglect, supervision. For those cases, yes, we call ahead. We try to schedule it with the family. We want to remain as family-centered as possible. So we don't like to show up unannounced. It's just that for the more serious cases, we have to.
Is child abuse, physical abuse versus neglect in the same category? Is that two different things?
It's two different things. You have the abuse cases, which is the physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And then you have neglect, which Rhonda said it was domestic violence, substance abuse, not supervising a child closely enough, depending on their age and cognitive abilities. So your abuse cases are your more serious cases, which would be kind of the investigative assessments, whereas neglect is usually not looked at as far as more serious. Now, the neglect cases can be more serious, but it really just depends on a case-by-case basis.
And one thing that the family sometimes, or people in the community sometimes misinterpret, is the definition of abuse. They see one mark on a child from discipline with a switch, and they say the child is being abused. For us, that looks a little differently. That would fall under the category of neglect for improper discipline. And so there is a difference there in discipline and being physically abused. And we take that into account when we're working with families.
So I want to kind of expand a bit on that idea of physical abuse when we come back from the break and talk about that, because I think there are folks that see that or think that if spanking a child or as in old school they would say whooping a child is some form of abuse and that kind of thing. And I want you to kind of dissect that for us from the legal point of view and from an intervention point of view, what those two things mean. Because again, back to what we talked about with judgmental issues, you could easily get into a judgment thing here versus a reality of what is legal and legal or not legal. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment talking about a very timely subject any time of the year, child abuse prevention. We'll be back in one moment.
Just because something may work doesn't mean it's right for your business. Let Star Communications' knowledgeable consultants help you customize a hosted voice system that's right for you. Our dedicated experts work with you to understand your business needs and guide you at every step, from choosing and installing services to ongoing maintenance and support. Contact Star today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're talking about Child Prevention Awareness Month. April is that month. Each year, you guys make a major effort to get information out. And Rhonda Matthews is supervisor with the Department of Social Services here, and Alexis Bumgarner. Both of you have been doing this for a number of years now, that you've created a bit of wealth in the area of experience. The academic backgrounds and so forth that you got are obviously a tribute to that. But when we went to break, we were talking about this whole idea of discipline and the abuse part versus the emotional abuse part. How hard is it to dissect the difference in emotional abuse versus obvious physical abuse? Because it seems to me that emotional abuse is real and can probably be, I guess, I'll ask the question, can it be just as damaging as physical abuse?
Yes, it's very real. It can be more damaging, I think, sometimes than physical abuse because it goes unseen more often, and it is harder to prove. It can be everything from isolation of a child, blaming a child,
degrading them,
scapegoating a child, and I think that happens more frequently than people would ever know to report. As far as discipline, the law is very clear for us with discipline, because that's something I think in our county we get a lot. You were mentioning off air, that child should have been whooped, or,
Absolutely.
We do hear that often, but for us, the law is clear, and it spells out that, it doesn't say you can't discipline your child physically, but it says that you can't leave a mark or a bruise that lasts longer than 24 hours. If you have that, a mark or a bruise lasting that long, then it falls under the category of improper discipline for us, depending on the type of injury. Now, if it's in a place where there's an organ or something that can be injured, the face, the head, the stomach, that would be looked at sometimes as physical abuse. So that's the difference between the two.
Tell us a bit about the medical community. Are they under a certain obligation to notify you guys if somebody comes in and there's a sign of something that they really didn't think the kid fell with a ball and hit their head or something, and they think there's something going on? Are they under this same mandate that everybody else is to report?
Yes, absolutely. They are still considered a mandated reporter. And one of the helpful things about a doctor or medical provider making a report is usually they can provide additional information, such as if a child does have an injury and a parent is giving an explanation as to what happened, a doctor could say, well, their explanation does not fit how this child obtained that injury, which is really helpful for us because, obviously we don't have a medical background. So we need that additional information to kind of know what safety plan to put in place with the family.
When you go and you're responding to these allegations and you get there and you look at that environment and it reaches the point that you see there's an issue, give us the steps that you take. I mean, obviously I'm assuming here, I shouldn't do that, but you wouldn't just go and say, okay, the kid's going with me. Y'all sit down and be quiet. I'm out of here. There's a process. Talk to us about that process based on what you see. If there is, using the objective that there's something going on there and you need to do something, what does it look like?
Okay. So if it was something like we were talking about with improper discipline, we could do a safety plan with the family that would say that, do the caretakers agree not to use any form of physical discipline with the child while we continue to work with them? If it looks like it's a more serious issue, like the child has a broken arm and the explanations don't match, or, something more serious, we can ask that the family have a restriction placed on them, like maybe one parent would be supervised at all times with the child. If it gets bad enough, we sometimes use what's called a temporary safety provider. That is where either another person who we complete background checks on would move into the home to provide safety for that child, or we ask that the child leave the home and go stay with the temporary safety provider that the parents choose. We work to provide all kinds of resources to look for family. Before we ever consider putting in foster care or a foster home, we're trying to reach out to what family they have. In fact, when we do initiations with families, we complete a safety circle with the family to see who they have in their inner circle, who they trust. It doesn't necessarily have to be family, it can be close friends, but we can use those people, if it ever comes to that, to be safety providers.
Alexis, just listening to Rhonda, it seems to me, I mean, you guys look like very peaceful, lovely young ladies, non-threatening, but going through that process, there appears to be a time there that there's a danger zone. I mean, if you start saying, okay, I'm going to need to do A, B, C, or D, which may include removing the child, the threat level just seems to me to go up.
It does in a sense, but it's also how we portray ourselves. So obviously with Child Protective Services coming to your door, that's not really what any person wants. So just understanding where that parent is coming from. If they are yelling or cursing, it's not going to do us any good to treat the parent the exact same way. So really just treating them with respect and trying to put ourselves in their shoes. How would we feel if this was happening to us? So that usually helps with de-escalating some situations, and really just trying to show the parent that, yes, we're honestly just here to help. We want to try to make it as safe as possible for the child or children that's living in that home.
And I think one thing that's important for the families when we're in a situation like that is to explain to them that this is not something that's supposed to be permanent. We want this situation to be temporary. And even if it is something that has occurred, maybe they did lose their temper and the child now has a broken arm, what can we front load to remedy that situation? Can we get them involved in therapy? Can we get the parent involved in parenting classes? Maybe the child's behaviors were leading up to that. What can we do to get the child's behaviors under control? These things are meant to alleviate the situation, and that safety provider is only meant to be very temporary for the family. And if we explain that that is to help the family, it's also to protect the family and the parents from further allegations and to protect the child from further maltreatment. Sometimes that has a better reception. There are times when we have been told off quite a few times by our clients. It happens. But we just try to be as respectful as possible and de-escalate it wherever we can.
Have you noticed a huge increase in issues because of the current, I guess, economic pressures that's been placed on families in the sense of food cost, gasoline prices? Everything seems to have jumped 40 to 60% in the past few months. Is that making it even more difficult not for parents not only to supply for their families, but to just be able to sustain adequate income?
Yes, I think right now we're still in a state in the pandemic where a lot of waivers for other services, benefits and things are in place, but those are about to run out as the pandemic ends, and I think we will see an increase then. Because once those waivers run out, families won't be getting the max benefit for certain things like food stamps and Work First. And we will see an increase in reports because there has been a large increase in food prices and things, and they won't have those benefits and waivers in place anymore.
During these times that we're going through, can you speak to the role of what faith-based organizations can add to support what you guys do? And I'm thinking of churches in the area that want to say, well, look, we'd like to either donate or support a family or that kind of thing. Is that easy to do, or is it cautionary based on the privacy laws and that kind of thing?
I think churches are actually one of the biggest support systems for families. Because you have this church family where if let's say we're working with a family and they're in need of clothing or food, churches and religious organizations really seem to kind of rally around that family and try to provide different resources to them. But also just having that church family to go to and just be a support system, whether it be like just having those different adult relationships between the parents and their other support systems in the community. Kind
of like a prayer group or something in the church would come together and realize these things are going on.
Yeah, I've actually had cases before when I was a social worker myself where the family maybe needed marriage counseling, but they weren't comfortable going to a mental health facility. They wanted to utilize their church and pastoral counseling. So churches have been an impact with families in that respect as well, and that's incredibly helpful to us. It's a strength for the family when they have church, community church involvement.
Are you guys asked occasionally to go out to church group meetings and talk about what you do and how that church can be engaged in the community to help in these areas?
Yes, there have been social workers that have gone to speak at churches in the community in the past. And I think typically the first Sunday in April every year is known as Blue Sunday, when individuals are asked to wear blue in honor of Child Abuse Prevention Month. But yes, we have been asked to go speak at churches before.
I want to segue into a number of other subjects when we come back for our last segment, but particularly I want to talk about the role of educators and counselors in public schools and how they impact the lives of children and how you guys relate to those. And is that something you're trying to expand on in the community? It appears to me that there's a lot of moving parts, but one thing typically, I think because of the way our system is structured, children are seen more in schools or hopefully at churches, but more in schools than they are anywhere else at sports games and those kinds of things. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking about Child Prevention Abuse Awareness Month here, and we're talking with two folks that are involved in this sometimes 24/7. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on the air. I want to thank you for being with us each and every week. Again, I want to thank you for your comments, your suggestions. Many folks email us at weshouldknow.edu@gmail.com. That's weshouldknow.edu@gmail.com. Sometimes we get post office little post-it notes or a letter that's sent to us, Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. We appreciate those as well. And our area of reach continues to grow as I've received communications from Wake County and other counties where folks pick this up on social media platforms. And it's always good to know that we're at least touching on subjects that you think we need to expand on or maybe look at in a little bit more depth. So again, as we come up on this last segment, we're talking about one of those shows today and folks that are experts in the field of child abuse and neglect. And that would be Rhonda Matthews and, of course, Alexis Bumgarner, both with the Department of Social Services right here in Sampson County. I wanted to kind of segue the show today to the role and I'm going to say expectation from your perspective of educators of public schools. How does that parallel and how does educators in the county work with what you're doing? Because it appears to me, just from my little narrow angle of view here, that educators, teachers, sometimes may see more of a child than parents do. I'm talking waking hours. Do you get a lot of feedback from them, or do you do programs for the school?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. One of the things I always tell my social workers when we're involved with a family is call the school, because they spend just as much time with that child as their family does. If we're not sure if an allegation is true in a report, I'll say call the school, see what they see every day. They are a big part of working with a child and assisting us when we need to get information. They are also mandated reporters, and they are very important in a child's life.
I know there's some children that they may not have, the family support that they need to disclose some safety concerns to. And a lot of the times they will go to the school social worker, their guidance counselor, their teacher, or even the principal to say, hey, this is what's going on in my home. I don't think this doesn't seem right. Can you help me? So I think that really shows the huge support that a school really provides to a child and families in general.
Sometimes the teacher, just the personal appearance of the child or the change in personal appearance of the child, I've been told they can notice that in the classroom, or more importantly, how they interact or act with other children. But yet then we all of a sudden see in major news blasts where there's been a child involved in a shooting or a child involved in some kind of physical assault, and we scratch our heads and go, what happened here? How did we miss this? Is it normal to miss it, or is there something that we need to amp up so we won't miss it?
I think for the most part, for our county, we have very good school resources. They don't miss much. Not to say it's not unheard of. Some children hide abuse very well. But the teachers are very good at recognizing it. And we, in our work, we use what we call collateral contacts. So we will often call the school, and if we have a report, as an example of maybe domestic violence, and then a collateral contact who is a teacher says, I've noticed their grades have dropped, they've become aggressive with their peers, that just sort of gives us more information that what we've received a report about might in fact be true. But I think Sampson County schools do a very good job of catching those things.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting quote that I read was the State Board of Education Chairman Eric Davis said that something he told the House Representative Select Committee on Education. He said that the state must rapidly increase the number of skilled professional psychologists, social workers, and school counselors to help students after 2 years of pandemic stress. Now, we talked about the pandemic stress, but there's other stressors. Then you added the pandemic to it. So the original stressor was there. You add the pandemic to it, and it just starts spinning. And one of the things I think he's pointed out is that we have known a lot of this for years. Do you agree with that kind of thing? Do we need more psychologists, more counselors in the schools?
Absolutely. I think that's something we've actually discussed in one of our community meetings, CCPT, about how, for instance, school social workers, they are so extremely important to ensuring that the children have all their basic needs, and if there's any safety concerns, that they report it to DSS. But the school system, there are hundreds of children in just one specific school. And usually school social workers or guidance counselors are split up and have multiple school districts that they have to serve. So that really limits their time on how much time they can actually spend with a child.
Does it expedite your response if you get a call from a school counselor or a psychologist or a school teacher, for that matter, regards to a subject in their classroom or a student? Does it put you on a higher state of alert rather than just an average citizen call and say, I saw something the other day and this child's shoes was untied, and in fact he didn't have but one shoe on, and they were dragging him along with a rope? I don't know what the circumstances may be, but does one kind of propel you forward faster?
Well, that kind of depends on what the allegations are, and we have a screening tool that we use on what our response time should be, so it depends on what's being alleged in the report. It does kind of raise an eyebrow for us if the reporter is someone from the school, because we know they see the children every day. If it's medical personnel or law enforcement personnel, those types of reporters do sort of bring it to our forefront, but we still have to go through that screening tool to determine what our response time would be.
Alexis, do you go out to churches or schools and speak? And if they call 592-4200, extension 3325 and get you, or if they call that same number and 3323 get Rhonda, is that something you want to encourage people to do? Or have I just put you on the spot here?
Oh, no, not at all. Absolutely. Not necessarily myself, but other supervisors have especially gone to the school system and just done some training recently about interviewing techniques, or when do we need to make a report? Because obviously if a child is disclosing something, we want it to be reported as soon as possible so we can address that safety concern. So we love to go out to not only schools, but different community agencies and just kind of give an insight to what we do or how to make a report, things that we look for. So we always encourage that.
Yeah, and I look at both of you, and I'm again, I'm making a judgment thing here, Alexa, but judging on what happens, you guys are in that position in life now that you're really carrying things forward for the next generation. You're really making things happen. You're the quote, when I think of movers and shakers, you're that. So when you look at the world through that lens, and you look at what's happening in our schools, and you look at the needs in our community, the question is, whose role is it? Is it the community's role? Is it government's role? When does government step back and say, we can't do this anymore? The community's got to step up and do it, because it seems like what I'm reading, and I'm looking at one that you might be familiar with, the Resilient Bladen County, which is Child Abuse Prevention Plan. They've got a very in-depth plan dealing with prevention of abuse. Are we saying to the community, look, you're going to have to step in and help here?
I think everyone has a different level of responsibility when it comes to child abuse prevention and awareness. Our responsibility, because we work in it day to day, might be a little bit different than your responsibility. Mm-hmm. But everyone collectively has something or some kind of task that they can do to ensure the safety of the children that reside in Sampson County.
And you can see it sometimes in the work that we do. We can front load all kinds of different resources, but if we're lacking in one area of resource like mental health or substance abuse treatment, it kind of stops there. So each community agency has to provide that support in order to be effective for the family. And sometimes struggling with resources is an issue in our community. But that's how we can tell that it is the responsibility of everyone involved, because we could do our job, or maybe mental health can do their job, or the church can do their job. But if it takes that one agency who's not available to have a breakdown in that support for the child.
We're coming close to closure here, and I want to leave a few seconds for you to kind of touch on some things that we missed, and I'll give you 30 seconds here, just anything we missed, if you want to correct something, if you want to add something, because again, we could do a semester. So I'll start with you, Rhonda.
The only thing I'd like to add is that, anytime we get a report, it stems from something: financial stress, not enough food in the home. There's some kind of stressor that's going on in the home. We have a really good resource center at the agency called The Hub. So if any family out there is listening to this and feeling like they need housing resources or food resources or anything at all, they can always call DSS. That's 592-7131, and they can ask to speak to someone in The Hub. And we can maybe help front load those resources before it ever gets to the level of having to, be reported to us.
Okay. About 20 seconds.
The only thing I really want to just reiterate is that, yes, Child Protective Services has the stigma of removing kids, but honestly, we're just there to help. Every family has their own struggles and backstory. We want to try to serve as an advocate for the family as a whole to see what we can do to help better the family.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank both of you guys for being with us today. It's been not only informative, but, we try to get you in as often as possible. I'd like to do a monthly show rather than one every a year or two. So it's a learning experience, and I think everybody probably feels that same way about this subject, and it's dear and dear to all of us' heart, no matter what age you are, no matter what you do. So thank you again for your service to the county. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today, and as always, we look forward to seeing you again each and every week on Tuesdays and at 7 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday. Star Communications Channel 16, WCLN Radio, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.